Hi everyone, welcome to week 6 of Methodism 101. This is the last week of our Methodism 101 class, and today we are going to be learning about conferences and committees. Now, today's lesson is going to include us talking about some charts as well as some maps. So I really want to encourage you to download the notes that are on the website page for today. We are going to be looking at this chart of the United Methodist Conference structure. We're going to look at this map of our annual conference's districts, and also this map, which shows us all of the jurisdictions as well as the annual conferences here in the United States. So today's lesson is kind of visual, so I want to encourage you to download, and if you can, print off those notes pages for this week. So one housekeeping thing before we get started, I do want to encourage you, if you have participated in this study digitally, watching the videos, either with a Sunday school class or by yourself, I want to encourage you to please share with me any feedback that you have about how this class has gone. Specifically, if there is anything about United Methodism that you still have questions about or that you would like to learn more about. I hope to replicate this class again in the future, and your feedback will help me to improve upon the work that I've already done to put this together to make this the best offering of Methodism 101 that's possible. So I really appreciate any feedback that you can give me. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started jumping right into our content for today. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is conferences. So the Methodist Church is arranged and organized by conferences. Now, if you'll look at this diagram, you can see that at the top, we have the General Conference. Then there are jurisdictional conferences. Those are in the United States. And central conferences. Those are outside of the United States. Within both jurisdictional and central conferences, we have annual conferences. Annual conferences are made up of districts, and the districts are made up of local churches. So this diagram can kind of help you understand the structure of how the conferences are organized, and I will tell you now what each of those conferences do and how they operate. So at the very top, you see the General Conference. Now, General Conference is the body that sets official policy and speaks for the entire denomination. This is the highest legislative body of the United Methodist Church. The General Conference is made up of delegates from all around the world. It meets every 4 years in a different location. I think the last General Conference, last special General Conference was in Minnesota, I believe. But it meets every 4 years in a different location. And it has different functions. So one of those functions, one of those tasks that they have to do is to revive our book of discipline and the book of resolution. So we've talked about the book of discipline quite a bit in this class. Every 4 years after General Conference, a new book of discipline is published to reflect the work that was done at the General Conference. Now, any congregation, any conference, any organization, any person can submit a petition to the General Conference, and the legislation that is presented and submitted will be discussed and will be voted on. So, for example, if you wanted to make a change to, let's say the United Methodist Women wanted to guarantee that all full-time staff who work in United Methodist churches have access to 12 weeks of maternity or paternity leave if they have a child. They could write up a petition, a piece of legislation, and submit that to the General Conference to discuss and to vote on. And if it was passed, it would be added into the book of discipline, to our essentially our book of laws. And it would then guarantee that all full-time staff people who work in the United Methodist Church have access to 12 weeks of parental leave when they have a baby or adopted child. So any changes to the book of discipline are made through petitions submitted to the General Conference. Now, most legislation requires just a simple majority to pass, but some pieces of legislation require more than that. For example, if we were going to change the church's constitution or the church's doctrinal standards, those require a larger majority to pass. One thing that the General Conference also does is to approve the budget that allocates all apportioned funds. So all of our apportionments are allocated in different ways. And so the General Conference figures out how and approves a budget to cover all of those donations. Between 600 and 1,000 people will attend the General Conference. It will always be equal amounts of lay people and clergy people. And every annual conference gets to send at least one clergy person and one lay person. Kind of like our electoral college, there's a formula to determine how many people each annual conference gets to send. So the bigger an annual conference, the more people that they get to send to General Conference. So, important to note that the Council of Bishops, which is made up of all of the bishops in the United Methodist Church, they can call a special session to focus on one specific matter, like the special session that was called in 2019 to discuss the way forward. So if the bishops feel like we need to have a special General Conference just to deal with one thing that's going on, they can do that. And all the same rules and regulations apply. So that's the General Conference. Remember, once every 4 years, the highest legislative body of the United Methodist Church. The next, if you're looking at your chart, the next tier of conferences are the jurisdictional conferences and the central conferences. And these conferences, they function in the same ways, they just have different names. The jurisdictional conferences are only in the United States, and we have 5 of them. If you look at this map, you can see the 5 jurisdictional conferences. We have the Western jurisdiction, we have the Southeastern jurisdiction, we have the North Central jurisdiction, the Northeastern jurisdiction, and the Southeastern jurisdiction, which we are a part of here in North Carolina. So this group, they work to provide programs and leadership training and special events to support the annual conferences. They meet once every 4 years, and their big task at jurisdictional conference is to elect bishops and to select members of the general boards and agencies, which we learned about last week. Now, the central conferences, they function in the same way, but that's what we call them if they're not in the United States. There is a Africa Central Conference, Central and Southern Europe Central Conference, Congo Central Conference, Germany Central Conference, Northern Europe Central Conference, Philippines Central Conference, and West Africa Central Conference. And they function the same way as the jurisdictional conferences. They meet once every 4 years to elect bishops and to select members of boards. And they also work together to provide programming and leadership training and special events to support the annual conferences. So the next tier on our chart are the annual conferences. Now, there are 3 different ways that you can think of the annual conferences. And when we say the word annual conference, it really has 3 meanings in the United Methodist Church. So the annual conference is first a regional body. You can see on this map that the United States has 54 annual conferences. So we are in the Western North Carolina Conference right here. But there are 54 different annual conferences. We've got Pacific Northwest, we've got Dakotas, we've got the Rocky Mountain Conference, the Illinois Great Rivers Conference, the Rio, Texas Conference, the Upper New York Annual Conference. There's lots of annual conferences throughout the United States. Now, in Africa and Europe and in the Philippines, there are 75 annual conferences. So we can think of annual conferences first as a regional body. Now, the next way that we can think of annual conferences is as an organizational unit. So each annual conference has a central office and professional staff that coordinate and conduct ministry and the business of the conference. So our conference headquarters is located in Huntersville, just outside of Charlotte. We have a beautiful conference building, and that is where the conference staff are housed. So that is where we have our conference communication specialist, our conference resource specialist, our conference IT specialist. The conference treasurer is there. All sorts of different conference staff that help to work throughout the year to make sure that the business of the conference is handled appropriately, and that the conference is resourcing the clergy, the laity, and the local churches as best as it can. So there are conference boards, there are commissions and committees. So for example, there is a conference board of ordained ministry. There is a conference board of trustees. There's conference finance boards. And say if we wanted to, as a conference, decide that we really wanted to work on promoting racial equality in our conference, we could put together a commission for racial justice, something like that. So the annual conference is an organizational unit. It is also where clergy hold their membership. So when you become ordained as a clergy person, you no longer are a member of a local church. You become a member of the annual conference that you serve. And most of the time, clergy people, when they join an annual conference at their ordination, work in that annual conference for their entire career. And for our elders who are moved around, who are itinerant, they are moved around within an annual conference. So, and again, we are part of the Western North Carolina Conference. We have a great conference. Now, the last way that we can think of the annual conference is to think of it as a yearly meeting. So every year in June, there's a meeting of the annual conference at Lake Junaluska up in the mountains. And this is where the business of the church happens. So this event is attended by an equal number of clergy people and lay people. There are opportunities for worship, for fellowship, and there are business reports. There are reports by the different groups. So, for example, the United Methodist Women and the United Methodist Men for the conference would give a report. There might be missional reports to learn about everything that's gone on in the past year. Now, at the annual conference meeting, that is also when we adopt goals. We work on new programs, we pass budgets, and we ordain clergy people at annual conference in June. We also would elect delegates for the jurisdictional conference and the general conference if it was the appropriate year to do so. So who gets to go to general conference? Well, people who are elected by their annual conference to attend. It's important to note that the bishop of an annual conference presides over these meetings. Our bishop's name is Ken Carter, and he is a wonderful bishop. I learned that his wife Pam used to work here at this church, so we have a connection to our bishop. Actually, Ken may have been here as well. I'll have to ask Miss Harriet to clarify what she told me, but we have a connection to the family of the bishops either way, and that's exciting. So looking at our map, our structure, we've talked about general conference, we've talked about jurisdictional and central conferences, we've talked about the annual conferences, and the next smaller breakdown is the districts. So annual conferences are made up of districts. Districts are smaller areas within an annual conference. They are overseen by a district superintendent. Our district superintendent's name is Sam Moore. and we are part of the Yadkin Valley District. So districts are smaller groupings of counties that can work together to put on district-wide events, district-wide initiatives. They can have district-wide mission projects, but they are kind of the middleman between the local church and the annual conference is the district. And then the very last layer on our United Methodist structure, conference structure document, is the local church. So we are a part of Louisville United Methodist Church. That is our local church. Now, local churches are run by clergy people and by committees made up of lay and clergy individuals. Local churches are where the laity hold their membership. So likely if you have joined a church, you have joined a specific local church, unless you're a clergy person. Your membership is here at Louisville United Methodist Church. Now, local churches, they have two types of special conference meetings. They have a charge conference meeting and a church conference meeting. Now, at charge conference meetings, this is the governing body of the local church, and it is made up of all members of the church council. Now, the charge conference directs the work of the church and gives general oversights to the church council. So once a year, the charge conference will meet. Normally, we would have charge conference in October or November, and we will reflect on everything that has gone on in the life of the church for the year. The pastor always puts together a report to help us to remember all of the good things that have happened and all of the challenges that we have weathered in the past year. We want to evaluate at the charge conference level, how did we do with our mission and our ministry? Where is God working in us to perhaps do things new or differently? And how is God blessing the work that we are presently doing? At this charge conference meeting, we also set the clergy salaries and recommend candidates for ordained ministry. So if you are becoming a candidate for ordained ministry, or you are a certified candidate for ordained ministry, you have to be approved by the charge conference of the local church that you are a part of. Now, the next kind of special meeting that local churches have are church conference meetings, and these meetings are much more rare. We don't have to have one every year. You could go many years in the United Methodist Church and not go to a church conference meeting. But a church conference meeting is a meeting in which all members of the local church are invited to attend, and they are extended the privileges of voting. So one example of a time when we would have a church conference meeting would be if we were going to take on a major renovations or building project. That would require a church conference vote. Another time to have a church conference would be if we were merging with another church. Sometimes two smaller churches might merge together to increase effectiveness, or a large church and a very small church might merge together, and that is something that requires a church conference vote. So those are the two types of special conference meetings that happen at the local church level. So from the smallest entity of the church, the local church, all the way up to the largest, to the general conference, we operate with a conference structure, meaning no one is ever making decisions on their own. We are always working together to make decisions and to discern the ministry and the mission of our church. And I think that is a really beautiful thing. We have a system and a method and an organization to how we handle the business of the church, as well as the ministry and the mission of the church. And it allows us to be connectional, to work together, and also to be more effective than we would be on our own. Now, the last thing that I want us to talk about today, hold on, I forgot to show you a picture of the districts. These are the districts that make up the annual conference that we are a part of. So we're part of the Western North Carolina Annual Conference. These are the districts that make up our annual conference. We've got the Smoky Mountain District, the Blue Ridge District, Catawba Valley District, Metro District, Uwharrie District, Northern Piedmont District, Yadkin Valley, that's us, Yadkin Valley District, and the Appalachian District. So those are the districts that make up our Western North Carolina Conference. So last thing I want us to talk about are the committees. And if you have been in the United Methodist Church for any length of time, you've probably been asked to be part of a committee. And that is how we work together. It's how we make decisions. It's how we guarantee that the work of the church gets done. Now, there are a few committees that every United Methodist Church has to have, and then there are lots of other committees that can be created for special projects or areas of ministry. So each church has to have a church council, which envisions and plans and coordinates and implements the administration and the ministry of the local church. So often the church council is made up of people from all the other committees, leaders from the other committees, as well as the lay leader and the church council chair and some at-large members. And we meet every 2 months as a church council to talk about what's going on in kind of every aspect of mission and ministry within the church so that we can support one another and so that we can all be in the loop and we can work together. Each church is also required to have a PPRC or SPRC committee. PPRC stands for Pastor Parish Relations Committee. You have one of those when you only have on staff just one person, one pastor in a church. And in our case, we have an SPRC committee, Staff Parish Relations Committee. So that's when we have multiple staff members that work at a church. And this is like our HR committee. They deal with hiring and firing and anything related to the employees of the church. Another committee that is required is a finance committee. We have to make sure that our financial assets are being handled appropriately. The finance committee oversees making sure that the donations that we take in each Sunday get adequately deposited and recorded for people's tax records. They also put together the church's budget and help the church to make good financial decisions. You also have to have a board of trustees, and the board of trustees are responsible for the property and the assets of the church. Now, church buildings belong to the annual conference, but it is the job of the trustees to keep up those buildings and the facilities of the church. They are also responsible for the parsonage. If the church owns a parsonage for the pastor to live in, they're responsible for maintaining the parsonage. So they deal with buildings and grounds. They are the leaders when we look to renovate or to build new things on a church campus. They make sure that the building and the grounds of a church allow us to live best into our mission and our ministry. Now, there are lots of other committees that can be made. Many churches have a discipleship committee, a missions committee, an evangelism committee, and there may be subcommittees within some of the larger committees. For example, we have a specific parsonage committee, or at least we have in the past, that's part of the trustees. Or you could have a stewardship committee that works with the finance committee. So anything that you can think of, you can make a committee about it. We could have a special committee just for making sure that we have the cleanest parking lot in all of Louisville. Or we could have a committee that is the Donuts and Coffee Committee that are solely focused on making sure that every Sunday morning we have good coffee and delicious donuts to prepare our hearts and minds and bellies for worship. So committees are a great way to get things done. And again, they ensure that no one is making a decision on their own and no one is carrying the full weight of the work of the church on their own backs. Committees are ways that we work together, and working together is a huge part of our Methodist identity. It's why we are organized by conferences. It's why we work in committee. We are people who work with one another. And I think that is a really beautiful way to be. And perhaps it is the opportunity of us Methodists to show the world that people really can work together and that we are better together, even if sometimes it's hard and even if sometimes it feels like it makes a process slower. It is good to work together. And I think our togetherness supports our church and helps us to be the people that God has called us to be. So that is a quick look into the committees and the conference structure of the United Methodist Church. Now, I know this might be really new content for you, especially with the conferences. I think most people have heard of the committees, but the conferences may be very new content. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, and I will do my best to answer any questions you have. And again, like I said at the beginning of the video, if you have any feedback about the whole class of Methodism 101, I would really value that, especially if there's something that you would like me to include in future offerings of Methodism 101. So that is all that I have for you today. Again, I encourage you to take a good look at these maps that are included in today's notes. I think they are very interesting. Y'all know I love a map and a chart, but I think they can help us to understand how we are organized. Okay, friends, that's all for today. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.